Super quick question here. How many tabs do you have open right now? If you're like me, it's a lot. And if you're running a business, it's a lot more. And with all those tabs, you're spending more time searching through data and less time, growing your business. But HubSpot's customer platform brings all your tools into a single powerful place that your teams can use together. So close those tabs. It's business growing time. Visit HubSpot.com to get started today. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Thursday, September 5th. I'm John Weigell here with Juliet, Bennett, and this is the Hustle Daily Show. How do you approach running your business? Are you in founder mode, involving yourself in company processes every step of the way? Or are you in manager mode, standing back as you hire qualified peers and subordinates? That's the new hot debate this week on the Business Block, and we're here to explain exactly how these terms came to be and who's pushing on both sides of the argument. We'll chat about that in a bit, but first, before that, let's give you the hits and headlines in business and tech. To start us off today, McDonald's is switching up its McFlurry packaging. Don't worry, a lot of them will still be broken at stores you visit. Starting next week, the chain will swap its dome-shaped plastic lids for cardboard cups as part of its goal to reduce greenhouse gas emissions 36% by 2030. Next, Volvo is the latest automaker to back out of lofty EV goals. The company, which promised to be electric only by the end of the decade, is instead aiming to have 90% of sales come from electrified vehicles in 2030, including plug-in hybrids. They've backpedaled similarly to how Ford did on the F-150 electric. From there, we go to Lyft with more car news. Lyft is set to discontinue its dockless bike and scooter programs in Denver and Washington, D.C. to cut costs, and will rename its bikes and scooters division, quote, Lyft Urban Solutions. I actually took one of these Lyft scooters in Washington, D.C., and it was annoying as heck to get rid of it. On to television news. Barney, the big purple dinosaur that we all know and love, is returning to television after 14 years via a new animated series on Max. The show debuts in October and consists of 52 11-minute episodes, another effort from Max here to bring in the childhood crowd. And finally, Nvidia lost $278 billion in value, the largest single-day loss for a U.S. company, on Tuesday when shares dropped 9.5%. And that's due to concerns about AI spending and the economy. Nvidia is still, though, valued at $2.6 trillion, so not too bad still. All right, on to the main story today. It's all about founder mode versus manager mode. The latest trending debate in the business world has pitted two separate ideologies against one another. So before you pick a side of what kind of company owner you'd want to be, Juliet, how did these terms actually come about?
These terms are coming from an essay that Y Combinator founding partner Paul Graham published on Sunday. So in this essay, he's basically talking about at a Y Combinator event, Airbnb founder and CEO Brian Chesky was talking about how when he was initially building that company, he was told, hire good people, then get out of the way, stand back, let them delegate to these people, and how that turned out to be bad advice. He really just needed to be more involved. So Graham is writing about how, essentially, in his opinion, these are two different ways to run a company. Manager mode, that's kind of the way that founders are advised. As your company scales and as you're getting bigger, find these good people, put them in the right positions. You step back, you do the other stuff, you let them handle these tasks. And then founder mode, this new, less talked about method, but equally valuable perhaps, in which the founders remain involved, even as the company scales.
Yeah, it's an interesting discussion because I feel like this, quote, founder mode has been more relevant lately, especially in the social media universe where you have all these new type of brands. A few weeks ago, spoke with Samantha on the podcast about a few brands that have their founder in their campaigns and they're very front facing. So I guess maybe there's more founder mode, quote, than ever nowadays, or you could see it that way.
Right. I feel like there is a cult of personality with a lot of these companies. I think he is an outlier and you can't really talk about his methods because he is so different. But I mean, look at Elon Musk. He's got fans the way sports figures and actors and musicians have fans, But then you've got, some of these other founders or maybe even investors that you see all the time, Ryan Reynolds, for example. When Ryan Reynolds gets involved in a brand, it's all about Ryan Reynolds. So we do see a lot of that. And we also see a lot of people on social media constantly talking about what it means to be a founder and how they get up at 5:30 a.m. for their ice plunge bath. We've got a lot of founders being very front and center these days.
Yeah.
Whereas I feel like before it was like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs were the only ones I ever heard about.
Right. And they did like a one presentation thing a year. And now you have founders telling you how they make their coffee in the morning. So it's a
Yes.
very different world we live in now from what it was in like the 90s and early 2000s.
Yeah.
But on the both sides of this debate, I guess, who is kind of in the manager mode camp? Who is in the founder mode camp? And can they both work? Because it seems like they do.
I think what I have learned from reading a lot of opinions, because I have never founded a large company, so I was like, I got to read some other people's opinions, is that no one really knows what founder mode means exactly or what it really looks like. I think there's an argument that some people are making that makes sense, which is you can do both. You can have it all. So what's interesting here is, so Graham points to Steve Jobs as a good example of founder mode. Apparently, Steve Jobs used to host an annual retreat for 100 people at Apple, and they were not necessarily the VPs. It was just who he thought was important that year. And, had these personal relationships with his employees, as opposed to being like somebody that you never saw, like in an office somewhere, very mysterious. But then the information founder, Jessica Lesson, pointed out that Jobs did have a manager in Tim Cook, and that founders are, and this is her saying this, not me, so don't get mad at me, are usually pretty annoying to work for and do need these solid managers to keep their vision alive. And you know what? That probably makes sense, because when you think about who a founder is, it's like that's their baby.
Yeah.
And they might not understand what they need to do to scale or what's not working. Here is one thing I can relate to. I turn in a piece of writing to an editor, and unless I was really rushed, I think this is the best version of this piece that could exist. And then I have to hand that off to another person who's going to make changes. And initially I might be like, I don't like that. But, oftentimes I will think about it and think, no, that is a better way to say it. Or yes, that actually makes more sense in other people's heads. Like they weren't in the room with the interview with me and they need that clarification that I can't see. So I think that makes a lot of sense. Some other opinions we've got chiming in here. Dan Rose, who helped build Amazon and Facebook, was actually praising Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg, who are, I guess, micromanagers. They were very involved.
Yeah.
Mark Zuckerberg will talk about this. At the same time, we've got VC Sam Gerstensong, who wrote that Jeff Bezos, and he also mentioned Netflix founder Reed Hastings, their playbook, if you looked at it more closely, would actually involve hiring the right people so they could focus on what was important, and what is important is constantly changing. And then also that they reduced information barriers. So they knew what was going on at the bottom and the tops of their company. So was Jeff Bezos a micromanager, or did he have good managers in between? I don't know. I guess he would have to be there, which Dan Rose was. But also you might be able to take an outside look and say, well, actually, he did these couple other interesting things. Another thing that I thought was really interesting was actually a blog from a Swedish investor, Henrik Torstensson, who wrote that is actually not the method at all. It is the execution. And he pointed to Microsoft CEO, Satya Nadella, who is, of course, its CEO, but not its founder, as someone who is a great example of a manager in manager mode, leading, obviously, a top tier company. So I think what I have learned is that no one knows what founder mode really is. And that is perhaps, as Graham's essay noted, because we don't have a playbook for it. They do not teach it in business school. The accepted advice is usually like, yeah, build your company. Once it starts taking off, get other people to do these things and you step back. So there isn't necessarily a playbook for founder mode. In fact, it seems like Brian Chesky, when he was developing whatever his version of founder mode was, developed it by looking at Steve Jobs. So what is it? We don't know. Highly memeable. People are really memeing it. There's some great jokes out there, but also it is possible that maybe the best execution for the best leader is to look at both modes and kind of play both sides, figure out when it's appropriate to be in founder mode and when it's appropriate to be in manager mode.
Right. Take a balance of the two, because it seems quite unhealthy, if I understand what founder mode is, to be founder mode all the time with everything that you do. And you will eventually, as kind of you talked about in the Jeff Bezos example, you will need to hire people that oversee certain parts of things and other parts of things so that you can focus on the big decisions that you need to make. So it strikes me mostly as a balance, like what side you're more leaning towards and also how big your company is. Because if it's a company of 5 people, I think you have no choice but to be founder mode and manager mode at the same time.
Absolutely.
But if you're scaling to now a large 10,000 person tech company, maybe you don't have any choice but to be manager mode at that point because there are too many moving parts for you. So it is a really, really weird definition on both sides. And I think there needs to be a middle ground for this.
Yeah. And what I really liked was that point about how Bezos and Hastings always knew what was going on, not just like the big, big important decisions, but even the smaller minutiae decisions that I think some founders are like, oh yeah, they can handle that. Maybe it's about communication. Maybe it's about you've got managers who can do the things and share your vision, but you do know what they're doing. You don't step back so far that you don't know. It's like when you put stuff in the crisper drawer in your refrigerator and then you forget you have it. And then you're like, crap, I had this whole thing of lettuce in here that I completely forgot about. Like, don't put things in the crisper drawer is, I think, maybe what we're getting here.
Yeah. Yeah. Keep a pulse on things. Don't back up too much that you fall off the cliff.
Yeah.
All right, and that's going to do it for us today. Thanks for tuning into the Hustle Daily Show. We're a proud part of the HubSpot Podcast Network. Our editor today is Robert Hartwig, and our executive producer is Darren Clark. We've got a lot more tech and business coverage in our newsletter. If you're not subscribed, go get yourself signed up at thehustle.co/email and throw us a follow on Instagram. We'll see you tomorrow, everybody. Hey, everybody. I've been listening to this awesome podcast lately called Nudge. It's hosted by Phil Agnew, and it's brought to you by the HubSpot Podcast Network, the audio destination for business professionals. Have you ever noticed how the smallest changes can have the biggest impact? On Nudge, you learn simple evidence-backed tips to help you kick bad habits, get a raise, and grow a business. Every bite-sized 20-minute show comes packed with practical advice from admired entrepreneurs and behavioral scientists. Nudge is fast-paced but still insightful with real-world examples that you can actually apply, and it's the UK's fastest-growing business podcast. I was listening to an episode recently where Phil had on Nick Kalenda, who is a former mind reader and psychic who now works with big companies in their sales departments on selling more products. It's absolutely mind-boggling, and you got to check this out. If you want an MBA's worth of insight in one single podcast, this show is right for you. Every 20-minute podcast gives you something extra special. And you can listen to Nudge wherever you get your podcasts.